Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and usually I like to respond to all of my comments, but recently, I don't want to call anybody out. Someone said, and they said a thing that I've heard many, many times before. This is part of the reason I don't want to call them out. This is, I think, a gaming cultural thing, but I don't think people understand what the word meta means, and I don't think that they understand what a metagame is. Or at least they do, but their concept is unhelpfully broad. So, today, let's narrow that definition so that we can all know what each other are talking about when we talk about the meta. A lot of these articles I haven't read yet, but I pretty much just typed in metagame definition and picked the top page of results. So, what is a metagame? This is probably one of the most ambiguous and abstract terms when it comes to game design. Therefore, you might want to do your own research, but for the time being, let's take a seat and let's dive into this together. Think of the metagame as a game that spans beyond a single gameplay session. This can be leveling up your hero to the maximum, unlocking all of the game's content. There are many variations to what a metagame can be. This is also related to big extent to... Okay, this article was not actually about the type of metagame that I'm talking about. Cool. So, this definition is unhelpful to us. However, this definition should be. There is a much more famous definition and usage of the word meta within the gaming community. What that links to. The strategy in many competitive games, how to most effectively play the game in order to win. Although I'm sure that there's some people who would say get the best characters, but I don't think that that's quite the answer you think it is. It's actually a term derived from the acronym for most effective tactics available. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that piece of history. If it's a game like Dota, you often hear people talking about a given hero's meta. These tactics can often change due to a new game rebalance or new items added, but this is not a metagame. And he's talking about... Okay, I think I just learned that I'm using the term metagame wrong. That metagame and meta aren't synonymous, and I have been doing that, so I have learned one of my own mistakes so far. That's pretty cool. Alright, Urban Dictionary, metagame. Because why would you look this up in a regular dictionary? The highest level of strategy in many complex games, metagame refers to aspect of strategy that involves thinking about what your opponent is thinking you are thinking. That's okay. Metagame comes... Oh, but see, they're doing it. So what they're talking about here, now that we've read the previous article, we know that they're talking about meta, not metagame. Anyways, I will continue this because it is pretty good. Metagame comes into... Well, I'm going to fix that, though. Meta comes into play in any game where no single strategy is dominant and opposing sides are aware of multiple strategies that can succeed dependent on opponents' actions. So, an example of metagame... God, now I'm doing it again. An example of meta, for instance, would be something like building a wall or using... what we have long referred to as scouting. I know there's a system called scouting in the game, but we called our thing scouting first, so we're not changing the name. The term is commonly used to refer to poker and complex card games, but is increasingly being used in relation to video games with complicated player versus player elements and even traditional sports. So, this is a term that is widely used within PvP. Slang.net says that a metagame is outside game preparations and strategies, a gaming term that refers to strategies discussed and planned outside of gameplay and how it will affect players' play of the game, used to anticipate and to adapt to how the opponent will play. often includes an evolving set of tactics as gamers become more skilled at gameplay. Which I think kind of literally means that you are engaging in meta or metagaming right now in watching this video, in learning more about, well, okay, maybe not specifically this video. I'm not really talking strategy. I'm just correcting people who are wrong on the internet. But in most of my videos, that would be metagame, in that you were... Okay, so your dictionary says a game about games, a game based on exploiting the rules, etc., of some other game at a higher level than simply playing the game normally. So we're talking about those fucking Galaxy Brain plays. Top tier strategy. Oh, we've already seen that. Alright, metagaming from Wikipedia. Approach the game that transcends or operates outside of the prescribed rules of the game, uses external factors to affect the game, or goes beyond the supposed limits or environment set by the game. So, a couple good examples of metagaming from this perspective is I was looking up a former guildmate of mine. My ability to just like... Oh, I'm so glad this is up now, because I can show you this in a video now. This is cool. As you can see, I did survive my first fight, but there wasn't as much wind on this team as I was hoping. We can take wind, but for this match, I specifically used this website to look up the information and the team for my opponents, so that I was specifically fighting only Earth teams that I knew from Arena that I could definitely win. I went into this game with MR units, who are by no means considered the best units in the game. And I would argue that I wasn't even using good meta strategy here, in that while I am thinking very far outside of the box in bringing an MR team to a UR fight in sub 200 rank gameplay, mostly this is bad metagame because there really aren't a lot of Earth teams on defense, and I am definitely not the strongest or most versatile Wind team. Wind team is good on offense because they are versatile. There are a number of things that they could potentially take when they can't find Earth matchups. For me, it's just physical wind. If I can't get Earth, it is purely physical wind. So this would be metagame. This is not a level of information that we were really supposed to have about other players, or like even scouting in game. Even though we're just using the game systems and rules to figure out stuff about the game, we're not supposed to be able to do that. We're probably, in general, not supposed to have 4 months of pre-knowledge of what's coming out, nor are we supposed to... I mean, look, if the game wanted us to know stuff like modifiers and percentages and didn't want it to be ambiguous and mysterious and all of that, they would have built it into the game. If you want to know specifically how much defense penetration, how much acquired AP up you're getting, you've got to go to a website that has data mined this game for all of those percentages, because they are not going to show up in the end game. And, you know, I'm not saying they're trying to hide it from you. I did say they're trying to make it mysterious, which might be a thing, but I think they're trying to simplify the what you see. And I think it's probably best for most players. Most players don't need to know the nitty-gritty of the numbers, but knowing the nitty-gritty of the numbers, especially in a game that doesn't show them to you outright, is metagaming. In games as an adaptation to a specific gaming environment. So another use of the term metagaming refers to operation on knowledge of the current strategic trends within a game. Meta. This is meta. This website uses the term meta very correctly. This guy specifically understands what the word meta means. This is the most, in terms of gaming, the most meta website I have seen. So, like, an example of that, though, would be, say, if you're playing Magic the Gathering and you're going to a tournament, you probably want to sideboard in cards that other people using your archetype or your colors or whatever are playing in tournaments. Because the tournament meta is very much based on, like, the best things that the internet can throw together. Whereas, playing the same deck at your local card shop, if they still exist, I'm pretty sure Hasbro is trying to kill them right now, but that's a story for another time. If you know that Danny likes to play blue and counter spells, you can put in a card that's really cheap that counters blue counter spells. I don't know. You've got like, I think it's Red Elemental Blast or something in your deck for like no goddamn reason. Just, well, it's not in your deck, it's in your sideboard. You've got like a 4 of that, which is a garbage card outside of Pauper, which is another example of metagame, like creating rules inside of the game to change the way the game is played. Like, you can only play with commons, and stuff like that becomes really... But anyways, this is a card you would never carry in a tournament sideboard, but if you know that, and arguably there's probably much better things to sideboard for this exact instance than Blue Elemental Blast, if that's even the right one that I'm thinking about. But it wouldn't be a terrible decision if you know you have a bad matchup against Danny's or Barry. I forgot what I named this guy. Anyways, and then there's another Alice. There's Alice, and Alice likes to reanimate things out of the graveyard, and you've got a 4 of something that just banishes graveyards, right? Normally you wouldn't run 4 in a sideboard, I would imagine, and maybe you wouldn't run all of these. And that's because the meta at a local tournament is much different than your local card shop where people are just making the best that they can afford. I mean, that's the biggest difference. And that is kind of the difference I'm trying to elucidate and describe in describing like lower rank play, like sub 200 rank play and over 200 rank play, because at the very least those two are different ballparks. Because one is like playing Magic in your home card shop where you have enough freedom to play around and develop new strategies. Whereas if you're playing in the top, if you're going to the big tournament, if you want to play with the big boys, you are copying every aspect of your design. You're maybe tweaking like 1 or 2 cards of tolerance. There are very few like original concepts, or at least concepts that remain original for very long within Magic the Gathering's tournament scene, because the second there is a new thing that works, people copy it. I'm just saying. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of unhealthy for, I don't know. It's kind of sad for a game with so much endless variable possibilities that the tournament metagame always rules those down to like fucking 10 decks. Anyways, I'm done bitching about Magic the Gathering for this video. Recently, the term metagame has been come to use by some players to describe the emergent methodology that is a subset of the basic strategy necessary to play the game at a high level. The definitions of this term are varied, but can include pre-game theory, behavior prediction, or ad hoc strategy, dependent on the game being played. An example of this would be StarCraft, which is where a player's previous matches with the same opponent have given them insight to the player's playstyle and can cause them to make certain decisions which would otherwise seem inferior. Last night, I was watching YouTube while I was doing other stuff, just kind of like running something in the background, and I ran into this YouTuber that YouTube has been trying to push to me for a while, specifically their most viral of videos, which is The Legend of Corner Boy, which you may have seen if you watch gaming videos on YouTube. If you're subscribed to this channel, you may have seen this too. It's an Age of Empires run where this dude from the low ELO Legends, I think he was in like 1100 or something, he builds his town center in the corner of the map, which is apparently an I don't play Age of Empires. I don't know how common a strategy this is, but I would assume if doing this gets you labeled corner boy, that no one fucking does it. And then he just beat the shit out of his opponent, like, pretty well.
No offensive siege for blue. And Red's going to send in 1 unit just to see what's up. And he's like, oh, a castle. Okay. That was really well done from Red. Who at this point should never take an engagement before Paladin. Now, Conquistadors are one of the most confusing units to upgrade in the game because it's on a horse. So you think cavalry armor, like this here, would affect it. But no, actually, they're Cav Archer class. So being Cav Archer class, the Archer armor gives them their armor. But also what's tricky is since they're gunpowder, they're not affected by Bodkin and all the other things archers are affected by. So I honestly think this will be a good engagement for blue, but blue will end up losing the castle. Actually, that's a pretty good engagement for red. What am I talking about? You can see one of their computers is breaking throughout this fight. You can see the stutter. We now have Elite Conquistador on the way for red as he sits behind the walls, which is nice. Blue can fire over top the walls, of course. But the conks are pretty well protected now. Red is doing this. Red is actually doing this. This is a crazy game. He wasn't ready before. Remember when he was waiting and people were frustrated? He wasn't ready, but he seems to really be focusing well now. And he has really good army control. The blue is just kind of throwing everything he's got into the meat grinder here.
So that video goes viral because of how weird it is to build a thing in the corner. I would imagine a short potential corner meta may have evolved very briefly, and then people were like, no, I think this is dumb. But this guy goes viral, so like, I just wonder if people go up against him and they're like, oh, this is Corner Boy. I need to check the corners. He's going to be in one of the corners, and therefore find his town center faster than they would if he hadn't been made famous by a YouTuber who, well, actually, in watching that video, it wasn't the YouTuber specifically that gave him the nickname Corner Boy. It was someone in the chat. So whoever the fuck it was in chat, congratulations. You just nicknamed this guy Corner Boy. That was all you. Good job. You win. But anyways, I just imagine, like, you know, any match that he goes into from now on, they're like, oh, it's Ram. That's Corner Boy. He's going to be in a corner. Because he does seem to play the corner a lot. Anyways. Cyber definitions, the text speak dictionary. Interesting. This sounds kind of like a boomer version of... Oh god, this does feel like a boomer version of Urban Dictionary. Metagame. Why is it all in caps? Metagame means gaming the game. Hey, that actually sounds better than game about a game. Like, I don't know. I again, it feels like a literal translation where it's like, you know, if you translated that from another language, I'd have another go at it. You know what I mean? But gaming the game in an online gaming context, that actually makes sense, surprisingly. I may have been a little too harsh. What is a COVIDiot? Oh my god. Unexplained dream. This is a lot. This is definitely for boomers who spend too much time on Facebook. I called that, but that doesn't mean it's a bad website. Okay, metagame is a term used in role playing games. Wait, okay, so hold on. There is a concept of metagame or metagaming in RPGs, not like JRPGs or like video game RPGs, but like Dungeons and Dragons, that is considered cheating. And this is not what I'm talking about here. However, I still like gaming the game, even though they're kind of talking about a different thing than I am. But let me read why this is different so that you can understand. Put another way, metagaming occurs when a player's decisions are based on outside knowledge. When metagaming applies, a character's actions are misaligned with the character's personality, history, or motives in order to gain a later advantage. Metagaming is generally frowned upon in role-playing communities, but not always. Some communities encourage experience sharing and storytelling among players, considering the gaming environment to be one of the players versus the developers. So, this is It sounds like, that metagaming is wrong in this context because you're breaking kayfabe. Because, like, you're breaking character is a less wrestling terms way of putting that. You're breaking character, like, your character shouldn't know that. Therefore, you cannot make decisions based on something you know that the character doesn't. You're supposed to be playing the game as that character. It is a role-playing game, and you're not getting into that role. RPGs, like video games, much different culture. So this definition is kind of unhelpful, but we'll probably see that again somewhere in here. Okay, Games Brief says, I have avoided using the term metagame in my latest book. Metagame has many different definitions in current usage in the games industry. We've run into 3 so far in researching this. There's the one that I'm using, which I will get to a much better article about pretty soon. There is also the metagaming within, like, person-on-person role-playing games like D&D. And then there's also metagaming in terms of video game design, which was the article that I skipped up towards the front. So that's at least 3. So this guy's right. For some companies, it is not everything that is outside the base layer, the retention layer, the superfan layer, and everything else outside the game is the metagame. Bungie called the campaign scoring in Halo 3 the metagame, for example. For some designers, the endgame, the elder game, is the metagame. This is often the stage where players band together to make a big impact on the game, or is just very advanced single-player gameplay. It doesn't seem very meta to me. Richard Garfield, the designer of Magic the Gathering, is often credited with inventing the term in a talk in GDC in 2000. My definition of the metagame is broad. Well, I hope this... Oh, no, this is a quote from a book. It is how a game interfaces with life. A particular game played with the exact same rules will mean different things to different people, and those differences are the metagame. The rules of poker may not change between a casino game, a neighborhood nickel and dime game, and a game played for matchsticks, but the player experience of those games will certainly change. The experience of role-playing with a group of story-oriented players and changing with some goal-oriented power partners is completely different, even though the underlying rules being played with may be the same. Chris Bateman, philosopher and game designer, often defines metagame design as player experience design at the level of the community. I agree. I find the use of the metagame to mean everything other than the base layer unhelpful to designers and foolish in its assumption that the base layer is the proper game and everything else is external to that experience. Okay, well, if we aren't getting definitions of what base layer, superfan layer, and all those things are, I mean, I think I can assume, but I would prefer not to. Okay. This is the one that I actually have looked at. I'm going to start with this video.
One question I get on a fairly regular basis during my game development career is, what is a metagame? There are actually 2 kinda similar but pretty distinct things we refer to as metagame, and in this edition of Farlands, a series about video games and video game design, I'm going to talk about both and explain what they are. Metagame is a term that can be broadly defined as a game beyond the game. However, depending on the context, it can mean one of 2 things. The first one I like to call mechanical metagame, a set of systems and mechanics created specifically by developers to wrap it around the main gameplay. The second one I like to call emergent metagame, and this is the way players mostly use the term. The metagame being strategies that transcend the rules and systems of a game by, well, emerging from them via player interaction.
Okay, I really like this guy's definition here. I think he breaks it down really helpfully for you. And he also marries two of the definitions that we have previously seen together. And he also marries two of my videos together, so mechanical metagame is what I'm talking about with the 6-month cycles and the way that developers release new additions in terms of skills to the metagame. Also, when I talk about the kind of arms race between accuracy and evasion, that is also mechanical metagame. These things are very carefully and intentionally designed by Gumi most of the time to be relatively balanced. And that is because, as we have heard in a previous definition, a metagame is unlikely to properly blossom, as it is an ecosystem. It becomes stagnant and unable to grow new life if there is one obvious solution, because then everybody uses the obvious solution. As long as the solution isn't obvious and there are multiple ways to approach the problem, we can have a metagame. Because then we have human strategies, and then we start talking about the prevalence or the spread of said human strategies. What YouTube content creators, players happen to be listening to falls under the metagame. You watching my content is metagaming. But this is all emergent metagaming, and emergent metagaming is what I was talking about in Gumi Economics 202. So, apparently the 200 level of Gumi Economics has been entirely about metagaming so far, so I guess this is the meta level of Gumi Economics now. Also, it's my first time using OBS to record my screen, and I kind of love it so far. First, let's talk about mechanical metagame. Every game has a set of systems, mechanics, entities, and loops that can be designed as the core gameplay. For example, Hearthstone's core gameplay is the battle between you and the opponent with a chosen class or deck. In Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, the main gameplay is going around the open world, taking and completing missions where you engage with the mechanics of stealth, navigation, and combat. They are all different types of missions, from assassinations to chase ones, from the main ones to the side ones, but they all utilize the core gameplay in one way or another. Metagame systems, however, don't. They are looping systems that wrap around the core of the gameplay. They can affect it, but they don't take part in it. Let's take Hearthstone's daily quest system, for example. Each day you receive a quest. The quest gives you gold. You can use that gold to make a purchase, usually a card pack. That card pack gives you cards that you can use to build your decks, and that will help you complete more quests. That is Hearthstone's mechanical metagame. While the quests provide goals to be done during matches, and the rewards of the metagame loop are helpful for core gameplay, the systems don't actually utilize the in-game matches directly in any way. And you can do that loop indefinitely. Now, things like Arena and Town Brawl are essentially on the same level as ranked casual matches. They're alternative modes for the core gameplay, but not a part of the metagame system. I've never played Hearthstone, I don't... Editor Jackie, please cut, the whole Hearthstone thing. In Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, we have the Brotherhood metagame loop. You can find assassin recruits in the world and recruit them to call upon when needed. No, fuck all this. Actually, fuck all this. For a really good example of metagame within Final Fantasy is Final Fantasy VIII, where it is completely possible to abuse things like leveling your guardian forces, leveling specific guardian forces, drawing a lot of characters, playing the in-game mini-game card game in the proper way to get the right things in order to trade them for certain materia, which you can use in junctioning to make your low-level characters insanely powerful while keeping them at a very low level. And you can do this very, very early in the game, and it also kind of breaks the way that the game is designed, because the level scaling of the game is based on your level. So enemies will change power based on how strong you are. It's a game where grinding doesn't really work in a practical sense. You have to use the junctioning system if you want to essentially get above your enemies. But this allows you to essentially be facing like level 1 enemies with kind of level 100 stats. And it is a very quick way to use metagame or knowledge that you have from watching a YouTube video of a guy who figured out how to break it before like the first boss fight or something. That's metagame. Now let's talk about, and specifically it's mechanical metagame. Now let's talk about emergent metagame. This type of metagame is specific mostly to competitive games and is about strategies that players utilize and knowledge of those strategies to define your actions. As an example, if in Hearthstone, at the moment of writing this, you go against a mage, the chances are that you are going to face one of the same archetypes players use currently. A control mage, a deck that uses delay damage with spells until it gets to the big hitters like Frost Lich Jaina or Dragoncaller Alana. Odd Mage, an aggressive archetype that uses Baku and therefore can only utilize odd cards. An Elemental Mage, a mostly minion-based deck revolving around elemental strategy. Knowing that this might be one of those archetypes, you then play accordingly as you figure out with your first turn what your opponent's deck is and how to best utilize your own to beat theirs. You might even face a mirror match and utilize the same archetype. The cycle of a metagame can be divided into 4 phases. Experimentation. This is the moment where everything is new and possible. People are going wild with strategies and approaches and getting really creative. Phase 2, stabilization. During the experimentation stage, some very efficient strategies would have been found and become oftenly used. What then would follow is the process of finding counters to those strategies, and maybe even counters to those counters. The established strategies would then also start to figure out how to defend better against the counters. Basically, this is a stage where everything tries to balance itself out. Phase 3, meta solved. Eventually, though, comes to a point where all strategies are known, counters to them too, and it's mostly a matter of skill and meta knowledge to stay competitive. It's inadvisable, though, for a game to stay in this phase for very long, since it can become quite stale for a big number of people, which is why the next step is important. Phase 4, the shakeup. The reset of the meta, basically, can be manifested in the following forms. Somebody manages to find a new strategy that was overlooked in the experimentation and stabilization phase, thus shaking up the meta. A balance patch was released, meaning that a lot of old strategies might become inefficient. This would be perhaps equivalent to job updates, which can kind of hit all sorts of characters across the board. For instance, one of the impactful ones that I don't hear as much talked about is that Kodadama Wielder has an instant cast guaranteed hit AoE now that hits most of a diamond at least, and that's pretty excellent for evasion hunting, whereas they had been kind of a slow and single target option only. So now they become a much more efficient evasion counter than they were previously. Of course, we're about to get 140 units, which is itself a huge balance update. And also that's going to bring in Yuffie, which is going to give evasion new tech, new mechanical meta, in order to shake up the game. And even though I've made a prediction video, and even though I know what characters are coming, I don't know how the things that we have and the things that we will get, like Hio, are going to change things. But furthermore, while I don't think that Phase 1 is as big for global, because to a certain degree, Phase 1 kind of only happens in JP. Because by the time things get to global, I mean, at least in the top tier, strategies are already known. There's much less experimentation in global, at least in top tier play. Although, you know, people figure it out, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying we're copying their notes. We're standing on the shoulders of giants often. And those giants are Japanese. A new expansion or otherwise prominent new game components is released, introducing new unknown elements. The shakeup sends the meta back to the start of the cycle, the experimentation stage, though the length of their error, not mine, and the stabilization depends on how powerful the shakeup was. And the shakeup that we have incoming is going to be pretty huge. All right, last article. This is from Stack Exchange, which I guess is kind of like Stack Overflow or like Quora. I don't know. Somebody asked what metagame is. This is the top answer, and I think it's a good one. A metagame for any game is the way that the game is being played. Knowing the metagame is not just knowing the mechanics of the game, but knowing what to expect your opponent to do. It is the relative frequency of each possible tactic, maneuver, build, etc. One of the easiest to understand examples of this are collectible card games like Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone. Knowing the metagame in a collectible card game is knowing about what styles of decks you might come up against. For example, in Magic, if your opponent plays an island on turn 1, are they attempting to lock you down, draw you out, make evasive creatures, or any variety of things that blue Magic players can do? If you don't know the metagame, you don't know the answer to that question. The metagame is always evolving for any game, so you have to keep playing or reading about your game to keep up with the current metagame. And you know what? I think everything that should be said about metagame has been said. Except to sum it all up and say that definitively, under no definition of metagame, under the 3 to 5 that we just talked about, is the metagame who the best people are and what the best units are. I mean, that factors in that often influences what the best strategies are, but that's not how this works. So, with that being said, thanks for tuning in to Gumi Economics 203. See you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Gumi Economics 200.